So I'd like first to introduce, we have our panel, which is called, what is our panel called? Pedagogy, Quality of Pedagogy. What's that class misbehavior down there? I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Senta Goertler, who is an associate professor of second language studies and German studies at Michigan State University and a national specialist on distance learning pedagogy.
Great, and also as part of this panel, we're going to have Mareike Sattler, who many of you just visited her classroom. She is the K'iche instructor here at Vanderbilt. She's been teaching K'iche for many years, both in the academic year program and in our summer field school. And Tara Kingsley, who is a graduate student in our Latin American Studies program. And Tara is the teaching assistant for Mareike's K'iche class and also is a student in the Haitian Creole class that we receive from Duke. So she's going to offer some student perspectives.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the invitation, for letting me come in here as the, I don't speak any of your languages person. So thank you for being such a welcoming group and letting me in. And of course, I'm a language teacher. I don't know if you've been sitting for a long time, even though you get a little exercise. And I also know that we always like to sit with our friends. So I'm totally not going to let you do that. So, especially now that you all figured out how to go online. Now I definitely have to separate you from your devices and from your friends. So Avery was so kind and told me that she was born in February. So that's very good. And what I'd like you to do is negotiate with your neighbors when they were born. We don't disclose years. I know, I've been here in this country long enough that I know we don't do that here. And we don't put it on our CVs in contrast to Germany. But about the month, and I'd like you to be seated from February around the corner to, and if January comes, you didn't get to sit on the other side of Avery, to December over here. So the beginning of the year is here and the end of the year is over there, because I'm a Western culture and that's how I think. So you might have to talk to each other.
We're all friends. Are you January or February?
No, you guys get to stay. You get to be my friends.
Okay.
I might be first.
Yeah, you probably are first. November, you're going to have to go over there. Okay.
So I have to move over just
Do I need my notebook here, or am I just communicating in the wild?
You're just communicating in the wild and being brave.
Wow.
I know. It's crazy.
For January 2nd?
What's yours? No way! Really? Okay, let's see. I was born at 10 in the morning Eastern. Oh, wait a minute. I'm
We're all the same.
No, I bet you I'm older. You definitely seem older.
They're disclosing
Wait, are we
birthdays.
talking about calendar age or just the day of the year here?
Oh, I thought we were talking day of the year.
10 a.m.
Time of the
Eastern
day.
time.
So you were before me? January 22nd.
Okay, so I'm right here. All
Oh,
right.
wow. I was 5 p.m. I think.
All right, I let you guys be my handout helpers. So I already got you one, and I got you one, so keep passing along.
I have so many people. Why are they asking?
Because they are my cool people. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Now, the next task, if you were in my language class, would be to figure out what you have in common with the person, if the month that you were born has anything to do with your personality. But you're not in my language class, so we are going to talk about pedagogically sound and sane online and distance language learning education. I come from an online language education background, so you'll see the two somewhat merged, because I think that no matter how you do distance language education, you'll need some form of technology to make it work. Even if you send tapes to the person receiving the course, you still need technology to do it. So what I want to talk about a little bit with you is what it is, what it's not, why we do it, and how we do it. But again, I'm a language teacher, and this is called a workshop. So we talk shop, which we've already done all day, but we also got to work. And so I put you to work. And I see the handout is going around. So the first thing that I always confront teachers with, and people, whether they're in my call course or teachers that I work with, is the myth that Robert Blake put forward about technology. So with technology being all the same, all technology is just the same. Technology is one thing. That technology constitutes a teaching method. And then thirdly, that technology stays static in the sense that if I know the technologies of today, I'm prepared for tomorrow. And then the fourth one is one that has already come up here a few times, which is that technology will replace the teacher, meaning that technology is the 21st century teacher. So I want you to turn to the person next to you who hopefully by now is a new friend and just react to those 4 myths. Do you think there's truth in them? Do you think they're just out there? Or, yeah, is there truth in it or not? These 4. Technology is all the same. Technology is a teaching method. Technology doesn't change, and technology will replace the teacher. Go.
They're always, like, as far as we know so far, there always has to be human involved. Even if it's a human person, right? So I'm not. Well, they have to right now.
Because I don't
There's still a level of human interaction because the programming creating artificial intelligence requires like economic
I agree. That's the one I kind of focus on more because I feel like
that is the
that's how fair with recorded content, people log in and
All right, ladies and gentlemen. Once you get them talking, you can't get them to stop, right? So what do the high school teachers do? 1, 2, 3. Huh? That's what my high school teachers teach me, and elementary school teachers. So that's how you get the kids' attention. So
1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3, and then you have to clap. This is not how we do it in Germany. So this is something that I learned through training teachers for the U.S. context. Oh, they just listen. Because they never get to actually be interactive. So technology all the same. We've already talked about today, of course, how technology is changing, and that means we have to change with it, which also is really uncomfortable because you're never done. You constantly have to move. Technology as a teaching methods. This is a tricky one because we hear that a lot. If we just teach online or if we just bring in technology, we're going to solve all of our problems, right? But we're not, because it's not a method. I can teach grammar translation with technology. I can teach a communicative class with technology. I can do all of those things. It will be different types of tools. It will be different ways of implementing those tools, but the technology in itself is fairly neutral as a general category. Individual technology tools are not, but as a general category, you do different things with your technology in your other life too. Technology static, of course, yes, it changes over time. They're all different. And then the key one, will it replace the teacher? How are you feeling here after today?
It already has.
It has replaced the teacher already, okay.
I think there's a push for efficiency so that it wouldn't replace all teachers, but it would replace. This is not what I want. But that it would replace some teachers, I think, is the budget cutting message.
It's a convenient efficiency for administrators to look to. Kathleen, I think, was mentioning it. Although we don't think it's capable of replacing the teacher, it may be a very convenient excuse or also a source of anxiety for some who might believe it will.
Okay. It certainly will, it changes our job. We may no longer be teachers, we might be educators in a more broader definition. So we may be course designer, curriculum designers, and not as much interacting one-on-one. But the teacher can be replaced or become more efficient in many different ways. I have a colleague at the University of Arizona who teaches a general education course related to German with 1,400 students in the room. I'd much rather have a distance language learning course with 20 students than be in a room with 1,400 students. So there's different ways that if you want to save on costs on instructors, you can accomplish that with technology and without, and online and without. So I think what we do see is that teachers who are familiar with technology are replacing those that are not familiar with technology. And it used to be, when you looked at job ads, it would talk about you needing to be able to work with CAL, with computer-assisted language learning. Now it doesn't even say that anymore because that's a given. If you want to be a teacher in these days of any language, you need to know technology because otherwise you can't do your job. So that is what is changing, I think. So as I was listening this morning and earlier this afternoon, I sort of took notes of things where I felt like we needed a little bit more definition, or at least definition as to how I mean it, since I do come from a different perspective. So face-to-face for me means we're in the same room talking face-to-face. It doesn't mean via a tool, it means we're in the same room face-to-face. Blended or hybrid instruction in my world means that part of the instruction is online and part of the instruction is face-to-face in a classroom, which is different from some of the things that were described earlier today. Online education is exactly that, where the vast majority of the instruction and interaction between student and teacher happens online. Maybe not 100%, but let's say 90%. So we have, for example, quite a few classes where the students come in for testing face-to-face, but for everything else, they're online, if it is possible. The flipped classroom is sort of a new, trendy, cool word that everybody should throw around. And I actually have a graduate student working on a dissertation on it with very positive results, so I'm no longer sniffing at it. Now I'm a little like, okay, it might actually work. So flipped classroom means delivery of new content online through online videos, online lecture, and so on, and maximizing the interactive time in the classroom with the teacher. And she has very positive responses from the students so far. Some of the same issues in that classroom as we see in online classroom, which I'll talk about in a little bit. CAL is computer-assisted language learning. I totally do not like that term, but it's a nice short acronym. What I prefer is technology-mediated language learning and teaching, because it may not be a computer. We've talked about iPads and so on and so forth. And yeah, the learning and the teaching is important. Synchronous at the same time. So this might be a Zoom meeting that we have. It could be a chat meeting that we have with each other. It might be the whole class. It might just be portions of the class. So, you know, group A meets on Thursdays at 1, but group B meets on Fridays at 2, which is what we have a lot in our German program. Asynchronous is where they are communicating at different times, so maybe in a discussion forum interaction or a blog post, where they're doing it at different times, but they're still part of a community. Computer-mediated communication is all of those: blog, chat, Twitter, Facebook, all of the things that I just tried to prevent you from doing by moving you around. Course management system, earlier referred to also as a learning management system, so those are your Blackboards, Desire to Learn, Sakai, Canvas, and so on. The platform from which we send out the content and connect the students, keep track of them, and so on and so forth. And different ones of them have different capabilities. For example, ours that we previously had did not have the capability of adding students from outside. It had a maximum. So when I did telecollaborative projects with a university in Germany, I ran out of accounts after the first semester. Well, that was not very productive, right? But now we have a new system, and I have unlimited people that I can add to that, and it works out beautifully. Before, we had to go outside of our course management system, which is always dangerous because then students have to click on multiple things. They need passwords for multiple things, and then you've already lost them. And then the web conferencing, which we have already talked about, like Zoom. So is it effective or not, distance language learning, especially online learning? And it's a very clear yin for those of you who speak German, which is a combination of ja and nein, so yes and no, partially, right? So yes, it has better or equal learning outcomes in the published research. It has shown that learning goals were achieved, so that's good. That there are fewer logistical issues, such as, we've talked about many other new logistical issues, but the things that led us down that path were not enough classroom space, the students weren't actually in the same location as the instructor. So we've overcome some of those things, but now we have new problems. And increased access. So now students can participate who previously couldn't participate. So for example, in our program, in the German program, this now means that all of our engineers who can't come to campus for a German class 4 days a week can now take German class because they no longer have to fill up their schedule with 4 contact hours. But as is often the case with innovation, when it goes wrong, we don't publish about it because it usually doesn't get accepted for publication. So there's a lot of failed attempts from which those individuals have learned a lot. But unfortunately, the rest of us haven't been able to always learn from those failures. And some of the more mixed results. So maybe oral proficiency didn't go so well. And again, there's course design is an important factor there. How you design it is going to have an impact where you succeed or not. And retention. I think this is something that we see over and over, that in the online courses, the students are not continuing as much as in the other ones. Now, this is a little bit of a double-edged sword too, because are these students not continuing because they're unhappy with the online format, or are these students that normally would have taken 0 in that language and now they're taking 1 semester, right? So we need to understand more about those students that are not continuing, why they're not continuing. And some of my colleagues have done some of this research and they're leaning more in the direction of, well, it's probably the student who wouldn't have continued anyways. You had a clarify.
I'm sorry, could you clarify the effectiveness of exactly what?
Of online courses
Okay.
across fields, not even language specific, but also in language studies we've seen positive results. So the Department of Education did a meta-analysis across field and the results were very positive, favoring online education.
Was retention looked at within, I mean, we have just much higher drop rates in online in a given semester, not even continuing. So you mean like continuing with retention or even staying in a certain course?
No, from one course to the next. Yes, we also have that problem where they drop early on before the drop deadline. But this is looking at from one semester to the next. So let's look at language learning. Of course, I'm from Michigan State University, which means I, of course, operated in an interactionist framework because that's what we do there. So sorry if you come from a different perspective of language learning. So this means what we want for language learning to happen is we want for the students to have opportunities to receive input in the language, lots of it, the more the better. Enhanced input is even greater. We want them to have opportunities to produce in language, to produce output, and interact with others, other speakers of that language of any level, and receive feedback. This being a very important part, so negotiating for meaning and receiving feedback. Of course, ACTFL and the 5 Cs are also important elements that influence us here, and I think especially important is the communities and communication aspect here, that we want them to become effective communicators in the language, and we want them to feel part of a community of speakers of that language. So, what do we need for a course to work for language learning? This is not even an online or a distance learning course, just a course. Well, we want to make sure that we have all skills and communicative modes in there, assuming that that's what we want to do. I teach a course, German for Reading Knowledge. There, we focus on reading and translation. That's what we do, because that's the purpose of the course. But a general language course, this is what we want. We want to have interpersonal, we want to have interpretive, we want to have presentational, and we want to make sure that we have written and oral formats of that. So that's checklist, is all of that in the course. Is it in a balance that I want? So if my focus is primarily on oral communication, am I actually foregrounding that? And if it's on written, am I foregrounding that as I planned? Is it multimodal? That already came up in earlier presentations. So am I focusing on many different modes of communication and presentation? Am I building communities? Am I making these students feel part of a community of speakers of Portuguese? Am I connecting them with other speakers of Portuguese? are they becoming a community of learners so that they can support each other? I think earlier, see now you're all sitting somewhere else, so now I'm there, talked about how after they're in the summer institute, they come back and they have this community and this connection and they want to stay in touch with each other. That's what we want. We want them to be part of a community. And are we using the target language enough, right? ACTFL says around 90 to 95% of the time by the students and by us. So are we getting close enough to that goal? And interestingly, that again is one area where we do much better with technology, in part, the students as well as the teachers, in part because there's a record, right? You feel way more accountable if it's on a record than when it's not. And are there enough opportunities for the students to receive feedback, individual feedback, group feedback, spontaneous feedback, as well as more planned feedback before, after? So those are the elements. So distance language learning. There's many things that go into it. Like I said, technology is always part of it. So are the technologies that I'm using providing immediate and objective feedback? And the objective feedback is the awesome part, right? My students hate the online workbook. I do too. But it gives them consistent feedback. It might not be the right feedback, but it sure is consistent. Every student gets the same answer from that automated system every time. It slows down communication. So if we use especially written formats of computer-mediated communication, it slows down the communication, which is especially beneficial for our beginning language learners. It equalizes participation. It takes those dominant speakers down a notch and gives other students that wouldn't have normally participated a chance. So this is not just me saying that. There's plenty of research. I mean, there's decades of research on this now that is supporting that. It allows us to enhance the input. Maybe we're showing the video with caption or without caption. Maybe we're having the text glossed and so on and so forth. We can do that in a lot more interactive way. Textbook publishers, which, sorry, Lictos, you have to fight for yourself. But you can take inspiration from these Spanish textbooks, right? And what the publisher's doing in that arena, because there's a lot more being done. The learner can control the learning a lot more. So for example, if you have those video lectures as an example, the learner can watch those 20 times, one time. If you explain it in class, it's gone, right? You explain it, it's gone. They can't go back to it. If they want to know it again, they have to come to you again, which has its own advantages. But this way, the learner can control it. So the teacher, because that teacher is central. So technology will not replace that teacher. The teacher is there for the personal feedback. Right? So you made this mistake, I'm going to help you with this. Or you did really well with this, now how about this next step? The teacher, with a lot of the online platforms that we're using, also has the option of learner tracking. I think this can be very powerful. It can also be overwhelming if you don't have the understanding of what you're actually looking at, but it can give you a lot of information about your learners and why they're maybe doing really well or why they're not doing well, right? So Ahmed, for example, did not do so well because he never even logged into the site, right? I mean, then you don't do so well. But after a while, he got into it, and then he started improving. Articulation. By having these records and more records of what we're doing, we can articulate better with other institutions within our own program across, oh, I have more here. No, I don't. Across time, across levels. Within, if you have multiple sections of one course, make sure that we're on the same page. Doesn't mean that everybody always has to do exactly the same thing, but it means that we're striving for the same goals. And at the same time, technology also allows us for individualization. And that is not during the synchronous portion, but the other part, and if you have an asynchronous portion. So that's when I can say, hey, John, you have been really well with the speaking activities, but I've seen that you've really struggled with the writing activities. So what I want you to do is do some of those writing activities. And then Jennifer, who did really well with the writing activities, maybe she's going to do some more of the oral activities. So it allows me to adapt. And again, access is the key, right? Just more people can get to it. It's also a very privileged portion because many students, of the students that we think we're reaching out to, we are actually not reaching because they don't have the literacy and the access to be successful in these courses. So digital literacy is taught in a way through that, but it's also a necessity for those classes. And it allows us to collaborate, to have students collaborate with each other, to collaborate with people at other institutions. When we saw some great images from the Wisconsin program where they're, integrating them with the iPad, that was awesome. And we do that. We have a partner class, like I said, in Germany. They collaborate with them on projects, and they have to have cross-national teams, which is helpful. But what oftentimes is challenging is to make sure that they feel part of a community and that they don't feel isolated, so that they still feel part of the community at your campus or a part of the community of speakers of that language. We need to make an effort to make that clear. And the teacher presence. They need to know you're there because they can't see you at all times. So you need to find new ways of making yourself known and available to the students. And one of our online teachers, who's a fabulous online teacher, he's like, I'm not really there. It's all pre-programmed into the site. But they think I'm there. And it doesn't even matter, right? I mean, so if they reach, I think 80% on the quiz or something like that, he has it pre-programmed that it tells 5 minutes later, it sends them an email and says, you did really well in your quiz, right? It's totally pre-programmed. He's not doing anything at 4 a.m., but they think it's awesome that he is always online and available for them. So a little bit of tricks of the trade, right? The biggest issue is readiness. So are the skills there? Do the teachers have the skills? Do the administrators have the skills? Do the tech people have the skills? Do the students have the skills to complete this? Are the attitudes right? We talked about teacher attitude. We've talked about student attitude, so I don't think I need to say anything more about that. And then access, like I said, is a huge issue. Which brings me to my next task for you. So we had a big panel on the flipped classroom, and one of my colleagues from the theater department summed it up very well. He said, the teacher should do what the teacher does best, and technology should do what technology does best. And I'm like, that's a very simple way of saying it, but a very good one. So again, go. With your partner, I want you to think of 2 things that the teacher does best and 2 things that technology does best.
I mean, I guess the personalization reading, like, associate the emotional things. Oh, you do? Yeah, adaptability. That's interesting. Okay, what is
I guess it's the opposite of this, right? This is a little bit, standardized.
Yeah, I don't know if that's
no context, but
right.
all of these things have huge caveats.
Yes, all of these do. Like you say, like for articulation.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. What did I have first? Teacher, give me 2 things the teacher does best. Because the teacher knows, right? So what does the teacher do best?
Personalization.
Personalization, feedback. Providing context, yes.
Answer unpredictable questions that emerge.
Exactly. The teacher is in charge of unpredictable stuff, right? And the technology can't do that as well. Or the technology that could is way too expensive for us to develop and goes beyond my budget. But the teacher can do that. Mm-hmm.
Also correcting speaking skills, so helping along with speaking skills, because the teacher needs to then be sensible and decide when to correct a student, where technology would always automatically do that.
There's some intonation software that can help the students self-assess and improve, but yes, speech recognition is not where we would like it to be yet. But again, as technology changes, the technology might actually be able to be a good maybe even better tutor than some of us, but not yet. I agree. Teacher is also the human, right? So not that the teacher gives the hugs, but you know, it's like, I can see you having a rough day.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons why we decided to not go online in our first year language program is for exactly that reason. We're a campus of 50,000 students. Language classes are one of the few classes where the students are in a small classroom. And small for us means 30 or less. You know, not your kind of small, our kind of small. And so, Ohio State is like, yeah, we know. so 30 or less is our small. So is probably the only class where the teacher knows their name. So we play a very important role on campus in terms of catching mental health issues, catching safety issues early on. I don't want to take that away. And it's a typical class that our first year students are taking. And I want to make sure that I can have eye contact, and when, you know, Jennifer doesn't look the same anymore after a few weeks, I want to be able to have a conversation with her, which I might not see if it's an online class. It just, you know, the picture is not, or, you know, I can't see how she drags herself in the room, right? So we all know about those situations. So that's one element where the teacher is really crucial. What can technology do really well?
Bridge distance, geographic distance.
Yep, bridge the distance.
Great quizzes.
Yes, it never gets annoyed. It's awesome.
I want to say about the quiz grading. I taught an online linguistics class. I wasn't really happy with it, but I became so aware of the feedback it gave me about, like, in each individual question, and I could see how many got it right and how many got it wrong, and I knew I had to go back to that, and I had never done that with, like, my tests before, and I was like, wow, you know, like, this really had interesting potential, you know, that
you can do a lot more.
I couldn't do anything with it, but, you know, that I could use that.
Yeah, you can use it for evidence-based decision making, and I think that's where the learner tracking is really important. But yeah, the consistency of the technology is, you know, great. That is an awesomest feature. And if you work with a language that has enough corpus data where we have good parsers that actually even writing assignments can get somewhat accurate scores, like it is the case in English, it's fabulous. But of course, I'm talking to the wrong room here with that. But keep dreaming. So here's my checklist for distance language learning. You want to make sure that you have automatic intelligent feedback. And again, we need more powerful tools to help us be even more intelligent about it. You want to make sure that you have interactive computer-mediated communication. So synchronous sessions, yes, but also if you have asynchronous portions, make sure that you have computer-mediated communication in there. That you have authentic materials. That you are multimodal, that suddenly that you're maybe online, you don't suddenly just do everything written. Or if you're working with a room-to-room collaboration, that you're not suddenly just doing everything orally because you're afraid of using that whiteboard and afraid of making it work with that other classroom and the other institution. So making sure you're really staying multimodal. That you take advantage of collaborative opportunities. It's very easy when you're teaching online to think of me and John, me and Jeremy, me and Jennifer. You see I have a thing for J names, right? So, and you have to work through that and say, no, John and Jennifer can collaborate with each other on this, and I don't even need to be part of it. I can take myself out of it. They might actually get more out of it if they collaborate with each other. You have to have flexible design. This is challenging. And opportunities for individualization. It is more rigid of a structure, especially if you put it online, but that's why you got to work on how can I still keep it flexible and individualizable. You have to have tutorials for all the tools that are being used. And with tutorials, I define that very broadly. That also includes the handout that Mary Jo was talking about to the students about this is what it means to be a distance language student. All of that is part of the tutorial. And that I enable the learner tracking, and that, like Kathleen was just talking about, that I use it productively. And then this is the kicker, especially if you have one group that is at your home campus and then another group that is elsewhere, equal access to the teacher. Making it, some of you have talked about, well, and then the teacher takes a field trip and goes to the other side. But you have to have ways that the students don't feel like they're second-class citizens if they're not in the actual face-to-face room with the teacher. And that you stay articulated across institution levels and time, and you've already talked about many of the issues that come about there. And then that the infrastructure is comparable. right? So that they have the similar access and support, because otherwise it can't work. It gets rather challenging. And that, as always, you have plan A through Z. And this is where the German comes in handy too, because if you run out of letters, we still get the umlauts to add on to the number of plans. But you have to have multiple plans, because the technology will fail. And you need to then text each other or whatever it might be. So you have to work around. So in order to bring you a little bit more expertise than my own, I thought I'd ask some of the people at my institution that have been involved in distance language education and online education. So I talked with a colleague who used to coordinate MOOCs, so obviously very knowledgeable. I talked with our LCTL course coordinator, who is in charge of the CIC course share at our institution for all of the LCTLs, and one of our faculty members in our online MA degree, and one of the people who were hired as part of a cluster hire into our Center for Language Teaching Advancement to help the language programs put languages online. So one of our online course designer and course teachers. And I asked them for feedback. But I also figured out while I was listening to all of you that I need to tell you a little bit more about where I'm at. Michigan State University, at the banks of the Red Cedar. We will win the NCAA championship. Just saying, in case you were confused. My son thinks Kansas, but hey, I'm rooting for the Spartans. So, what are we? What do we have around us? We have, since 2009, I believe, the Center for Language Teaching Advancement, which is so much more than a language lab. It afforded us the cluster hires of people that design online courses in the languages that seemed open to going in that direction. And it has the language lab, which we use for testing and for some of the distance courses. We also use it for in-class for our face-to-face students. It has a community language program. I already mentioned that. 3-year-olds down to up to senior citizens. And we have immersion workshops for language teachers. So we bring in K through 12 teachers, and it's all in German, and they learn some new technologies or other pedagogical elements, but we do it in German with German food and everything. And we just do the same thing in Spanish and the same thing in French. Because one of the challenging things for K through 12 teachers is staying active in the language. If you only talk German on a first-year level, your German is not going to stay that pretty. And then it has help hours. There's training for learners. What do I need to do to be an effective language learner? This, by the way, a lot of these resources are on the CELTA website that you can use for your students as well. So take it and run with it. Then we have the LCTL program, which we take heavy use, as you saw in the stats, of the CIC course share. And we take great advantage of the FLTAs. And we do the orientations on our campus for the FLTAs nationally. And we have a pedagogically trained, with an MA, coordinator of the LCTLs who is absolutely amazing and works around the clock and makes this all happen, trains those teachers, is available for them, because a lot of turnover of teachers, so she is the one who has to make sure that everything moves over to the new semester and that nothing gets lost. And she can tell you a lot of crying stories of how things get lost when you move it from semester to semester. Then we have our language departments. I already mentioned that we get a financial kickback if we teach online, so we like teaching online for that. And we have tried everything. We teach a course called Reading Knowledge, and that's where we really realized that our model isn't working, because our tuition is too expensive for the students that we want to participate in this course. So this came up earlier, so that is not working. We're trying to find solutions for that. We've taught online, we've taught blended, we've taught flipped. We've tried it all. We're now going with most of our sections are face-to-face, and one section is online. That's our model in German, and it works pretty well for us. Like I said, we have the online MA in foreign language teaching with students from around the world, and that is completely online and has synchronous meetings, which is quite challenging across the global array of time zones. Find a meeting time that works for the student in Oregon and the student in Lebanon and the student in Germany and the student in Ohio. It gets quite interesting. And then we have our LRC, the Center for Language Education and Research, which of course has developed a lot of tools and also offers summer workshops. So we have a pretty good language-related infrastructure that supports us. in our efforts to offer a distance language education. And we are very fortunate in that. And that's just within the languages. Also, we got a new building. And we're now all in the same building. We didn't used to be in the same building. And we're now across the street from our study abroad office and the International Student Center. And we're also in the same building with the English Language Center, which means we can have great language partnerships. So, genius idea. Thank you, former Dean Karin Wurst. That was awesome. So what did they say is most important? Social presence. I already said that. Distance language education, be present. Clear, specific timelines for feedback. Clear and simple explanation. The simpler the better, because it takes too long to make it more complex. They have found that the best way to run their programs is to have 1 hour a week synchronous meeting. It might not be the whole class, because that might not always be logistically possible. So Adam, for example, in the German program, he offers 3 different 1 hour sessions, and you can sign up for any one of them. Also, because we have on-campus courses, we allow the students to take a pass, electronic pass, and then come to our face-to-face classes. So if they get to a point where like, I just don't understand this part, and they really want to come to a face-to-face class, they can do that. We just need to know in advance, and we leave spots in our classroom for up to 3 students to do that on any given day. Plan it beforehand. You need planning time. Several people said a year planning time. Yes, absolutely. Accept imperfection. I think we all need to learn that at all times. Technology helps teacher facilitate learning. It does not replace the effort, expertise of teachers and students. So only because I have the technology doesn't magically make it good. I still have to make it good. So, wish I knew. I wish I knew that synchronous meetings are hard to plan and very different from face-to-face meetings, because you have a screen between you. Less is more. They all said that. Less is more. Use fewer tools, but use them well and often, and avoid technology overload both for you and the student. Teacher does not have to be an expert in everything, especially when it comes to technology. Send the students to the experts on campus if they run into trouble, and don't be the troubleshooter. Or if you're the person providing the infrastructure, make sure there is a person who can help them, rather than the teacher having to be the technology expert and the teacher. If you have teacher turnover, use technologies that keep the materials ready for the next teacher. So this was a huge problem in our LCTL programs, where they created wonderful, multimodal, lots of audio materials, and then they exported it over, and all the attached audio files disappeared. And they had to start all over again. Sad moment on the 4th floor. Always have backup plans. We already heard that. Structure and flexibility are needed. So you have to find a balance between them. What works, what doesn't? Synchronous meetings work. Individual feedback and interaction is crucial. Learner tracking, super helpful. Logistical flexibility makes it possible for a lot of students to now have access to these courses that didn't work before. It works really well for self-regulated, motivated students. So that's why we talked a lot about graduate students. Asynchronous online activities are a lot trickier. Oftentimes they just feel like, there's a lot of homework in this course. Well, it's not homework. You're meeting less hours, but they don't always get that. Again, you have to educate more. It doesn't work for the non-self-regulated learners. So what we see in our blended courses, in our online courses, in our flipped classrooms is we see grades go this way. You're either on the top or you're in the bottom, and we have very little in the middle. Versus in our face-to-face classes, we have a distribution of grades from top to bottom, with lots in the middle as well. And then that also means that retention is an issue. And then some of the most effective interactive learning tasks are hard to do online. So jigsaws and things like that, a lot hard, communicative activities, a lot harder to make that facilitate online. And it needs to be connected to your overall curriculum, right? It somehow needs to make sense with the rest of what they're doing and what you're doing in your program. So necessary resources, conferences and workshops offer training for the students in-house, but also provide them with the funding to go elsewhere, to places like this, so they can exchange with others that are doing the same. Take advantage of cluster hires, collaborative initiatives, work with other people that are doing something similar, make realistic timelines that allow for development, piloting, evaluating, revising. Financial support for tools and times. In the beginning, some of our instructors paid for their own tools. And I said, you're not going to pay for that. You're going to go to our chair and say, I'm teaching this course online, I'm using this tool, please pay for it. Because you shouldn't. Time for course management and redesign, so building that into the timeline that you need to revise it constantly. And then training, I already said, provide those guides, we already talked about that, support personnel, and have materials and events to educate the stakeholders what it's all about. So that's my schnell spiel. And then I had a whole bunch of other stuff that I'm not going to talk about. But luckily, I also made a handout, which I distributed to all of you. So what I wanted to talk to you about is the Online Learning Consortium, previously known as the Sloan Consortium, came up with a framework with 5 pillars of evaluating online education. And I think that's a very valuable framework for the kinds of tasks that you're talking about. So I took the liberty of copying it into this handout. So it talks about 5 elements. The learners need to be satisfied, the faculty need to be satisfied, feel like they're doing something valuable and they're being valued, and learning needs to happen. Sorry, I did the wrong order. And it needs to be scalable. We already talked about, is this appropriate? And we need to make sure that the access actually happens. And part of that is the step 1 that we talked at the previous session about, how do these people even find out we exist? So that's where access starts. So, and then I'll go through all of these things that I would have talked to you about, but you can read, and you're smart adults, and then we get to this one. So a lot of you talked about the village, but that's too many letters. So I talk about the team. It takes a team, and team means I need to have technical expertise, so it's somebody, or preferably, because we're talking about a village, multiple people who know about the technology to help me work it. I need somebody with good, solid educational training who can make the pedagogy work for this course. I need administrative support, administrative knowledge, administrative backing, financial support, personnel, and so on. And then I couldn't think of an English word for this, so I had to resort to my first language. And then I need the menschlich part. I need the humans to make this happen, and they need to also stay human. Edwige Simon from University of Colorado Boulder wrote her dissertation on online education, and one of her subjects said, online education takes the human out of the humanities. And that sort of always sticks with me. And so I think it's very important that we keep the human in online education and that we treat it as that. So what I had prepared for you here, but I want to give the other people time to talk as well. But this is really something that you can do, should do, may want to do with your team as you go back to your institution. So activity 3, I had said, think about what do you want to do, why do you want to do that, how will you do it, when will you do it, and who will do it. So, Gesundheit, the essential questions. And then the next piece is sort of the needs analysis, going back to all of the elements that the Online Learning Consortium laid out as elements of effective online learning. Do you have them? So what do I want in this area for course design? What do I need? And what do I already have? Because again, one of the biggest challenges with any kind of distance language education, online education, or really any educational measure is identifying what is already being done here. What are the experts here or expert elsewhere that I can connect with, and what are the resources that I can take advantage of? So that's sort of your little assessment, self-assessment. Anytime you do curricular revisions, this is the roadmap. Needs analysis. What do we need? What do the people need that are involved? And then designing it, implementing it, having mechanisms to evaluate your implementation of your new curriculum, your new course, and then revision and adjusting, and then starting it all over again, because by that time the time has changed, the technologies have changed, your students may have changed, so you get to do this over and over again, which is why it should be a spiral and not a circle. But I couldn't figure out how to do that on PowerPoint, so it's a circle. But that's what you want to do, continuously change, so that the product is pedagogically sound, so it has the same quality standards as any other educational activity that you have in your institution, because you're using that name, right? So you want to have that quality. But at the same time that you don't have students and faculty and administrators and tech support go like this. You want those people to stay sane. You want them to be supported, feel valued, and have the resources they need, and have it stay cost effective. But that means balance, right? That means you guys had to sort of wall line. This is my version of that. So if you're going to have a limited budget, you're going to make cuts on your design. If you have really good tech support, you can go ramp up the tech piece. If you don't have that, you have to go down with that, and so on and so forth. You have to find a balance. On your handout also, I have several resources. I didn't think of everything that I thought of while I was sitting here, but I came up with several of the things. One of the is an article that I wrote on the effectiveness of online and blended learning. But then also the National Foreign Language Research Center in Hawaii did a really good job of putting together very nice webinars, edX talks on how to make language education online. And they're archived and free and available, and I think that's a great start. And then, like I said, the Online Learning Consortium, I have mixed feelings about them, but the framework for evaluation is a good one, so I can recommend that. So with that, I say thank you. And then I also hand it over
to the other German.
Yeah, it's the German domination. And you don't need neither.
I don't need anything. No, I'm very low tech in this workshop on technology. Anyway, my name is Mareike Sattler. I'm the K'iche instructor here and have been so I think since about 2009. I can't even remember when I started. So many of the points that I was going to address were already mentioned several times here, so I may skip some of them. I will offer you sort of the teacher perspective and see, yeah, so I want to give you a little background about K'iche at Vanderbilt, how our class or how our curriculum looks like, how our student body is and things like that. Then talk a little bit about challenges for me as teachers and a teacher, and then end up with things I would like to change or have, or what could be improved. Most of you were in my classroom just a few minutes ago. So when I started here, K'iche already existed, but it was taught in a very traditional classroom setting, was not online or any digital or any technology involved except for handouts like printed paper. Enrollments were fairly small, but we had a native speaker assistant, which was a very, very good program. And the way the class was structured back then was the gringo teacher would kind of give traditional lecture style grammar lessons and explanations. And then the students would meet, I think it was a 5-hour class, the students would meet one-on-one for 2 hours a week with the native speaker and would get practice that way. That also allowed for individual progress to happen. So we always have people who are acquiring languages a lot faster and easier than others, and having a large focus on individual one-on-one instruction allowed for them really to progress quickly. And also most of our students come sort of from anthropology or sort of similar fields. They often come with specific interests in their fields, which are not necessarily linguistic. So that access to the native teacher allowed them also to pursue their interests that way. However, we don't have that anymore. So I had to when I took over the class, I had to make up for the lack of the native speaker. And I also realized that the course material that I've inherited was a little too traditional sort of for my taste. And so ever since then I've been trying to include a little more interactive little language learning activities that actually center on themes or interactions rather than grammatical topics. I think that's with LCTLs, we often have the problem that we teachers actually didn't really grow up or wanting to become necessarily language teachers. So we all come from different areas and are not really trained in teaching language. Anyway, so this is a ongoing process for me as a teacher and as one who prepares curriculum development. You mentioned language-related support structures. We have very few here at Vanderbilt, at least not the ones I would, partly, not the ones I would like. We do not have a linguistics department, for example. So our students, LCTLs often draw from those departments. We don't have that. We have to try and reach out to potential interested students from all kinds of parts of campus. And our fabulous Center for Latin American Studies is very helpful in doing that. And let me just give you a brief outline how that works. So our anthropology department is 100% Latin American focused. So that is a potential group for interested students. But the center also puts in a lot of effort to collaborate with every school on campus. So we have medical missions, surgical missions going to Guatemala. Well, maybe I should say, for those who don't know, K'iche is spoken in Guatemala. It's the fourth largest indigenous language of the New World, of the Americas. Has about 1 million speakers. It's the largest language spoken in Guatemala, apart from Spanish. And now, through immigration, has also quite a strong presence in the United States. And I see that in my student interests. Lots of them, many of them express interest in working with migrant communities now here in the States, not necessarily going to sort of anthropological work in the fields. Anyway, so in order to attract students, we try to reach out to different parts of campuses, the medical school, nursing. There's a program in engineering that takes students to Guatemala to work in clinics repairing medical equipments. And so on and so forth, alternative spring break. However, as you all know, language learning requires a lot of energy and commitment. So not everybody who goes to Guatemala for a week or a summer might want to put in all this work learning a language. So we always struggled attracting students, but this new format and this consortium really allowed us to reach more students. Which is fantastic also from a teacher perspective. I really like teaching to a larger student body. There was something else I was going to say, which escapes me right now. So our sequence is the following. We have 4 semesters. We always start in the fall with a beginner class. So I always teach beginning and a more advanced level in all semesters. The first 2 semesters are focused on grammar skills, and then always with talking and speaking communicative exercises as well. But the focus in the 3rd semester shifts a little bit more towards working on larger text bodies. The University of New Mexico, for example, houses a very nice archive of Quichean recordings, which are in audio format and in written format accessible. So I work a lot with those texts. As you can imagine, there is not much material available for me that was not really produced by myself that I could use, or by my predecessors here, that I could use with students. So generating new materials, it takes a lot of energy, and I can't just say, go check out the textbook or take this quiz. It has to come from me. So one of the projects I do with my students in the 3rd semester is they pick one of these folk tales that were recorded in the 70s, and they have to check it against check the transcription against recordings, and against the audio, and they have to transcribe it into the new orthography. If you work with Mayan languages, you have to kind of juggle all kinds of different orthographies and writings. Anyway, so that is that. The 4th semester is even more text-based, and we are looking at sort of the full historic gamut of texts in K'iche, which is, we have about 450 years of documented K'iche accessible to us, starting with documents from 1550. Most of you will probably have heard of the Popol Vuh, so all the students are excited about that. But there also there's a dance drama in K'iche, so we talk about other colonial documents, and that always also gives us the opportunity to tie this into greater cultural, historical, Mesoamerican context. I usually also include a little section on glyphs, because that's often something that excites students, and because of the similarity, it's not the same language, but there are enough similarities in the language structure, I can point out things that students can understand. Now, one question is came up several times already, dialects, or what type of K'iche do we actually teach? So our sister program at Tulane, which teaches K'iche, takes the approach we teach a standard form of K'iche. When our K'iche program was instituted here, the decision was made sort of a bottom-up rather than top-down approach, and we teach a particular dialect of K'iche, which has advantages but also great disadvantages. The advantage is we have developed quite a close collaboration connection to this area where this dialect is spoken. It's Nawala. It's a very traditional Maya town, and traditional in the sense that K'iche is still the language in which all parts of life are conducted. So when we take our students there for the field school in the summer, they really have a true immersion experience. People are bilingual, the younger generation for sure, but K'iche is the language that's used in the streets. If you go to the internet cafe or place and you want to connect to the internet, you do that on K'iche, or in K'iche, which is kind of fascinating. One of the biggest disadvantages is that most materials that actually have or that materials that have been published or that our library has, children books or sort of bilingual education materials, are standard or something like that. It's still kind of a negotiated thing, actually, what is the standard variety of K'iche or of any Mayan language. So that for a beginning language student, it's often confusing. In my experience, students, since they never really learned any language like this before, you learn language always from sort of taking a standard approach. They have lots of trouble dealing with variety, and so not accepting why there is not just one answer. Why can I say it this way and sometimes it's that way? Anyway, so I can actually, for my beginning levels, it's hard to draw from other material that exists. And so that's sort of our sequence. How do I do my sort of the daily teaching thing? Right now our classes are Tuesday and Thursdays, so it's a 3-hour class. I would prefer more hours, but it's just not. That's just how it is. We teach with UVA and Duke, and receive classes in return, Tibetan and Haitian Creole. In addition to those class times, I require my students to meet with me on Skype, and that is an attempt on my part to create a community of people, and especially to create more personal connections with my students. And in order to keep it all equal, even my Vanderbilt students meet with me on Skype, although they theoretically could just walk in my office. But so they have to meet with me 6 times the semester, plus the oral exam, so 7 times. But I'm always available for more meetings if they choose to do so, if they feel they want to talk through something. I'm very available, make myself available. I have on Google Docs an open schedule, and they just write in their names in certain slots, and I check every day who signed up, and then kind of go from there. And of course let them know if I can't do something then, but that's too. Everybody has access to Blackboard, so our communication about class materials goes through that. We had some trouble in the beginning. They also turn in work through Blackboard. I personally do not really like grading online or grading on a screen. I'd rather do this on paper, but I think that's something that is learnable or that I can get used to. Yeah, so we do quizzes, tests. I have to arrange for proctors, in the remote locations, which involves extra kind of scheduling. I found it's very helpful to have in each other institution to have one person there that I can go to with all these questions, right? And at UVA, it was very helpful to have that, and that person in the beginning also held office hours or something to, also with the intent to creating more of a community where the students there could get together and actually meet outside of the classroom. Because of my other teaching schedule, I can't really take off sort of the days I would need to go through all the campuses if I wanted to visit them. Although that was always the idea at some point, and maybe it can be worked out. Right now it's sort of a logistical question, but ideally I would go to the other campuses and see them. I do a final oral examine as well on Skype with everyone, and in terms of evaluation, I do sort of OPI equivalent standards that I use. I'm not trained in that, but I have kind of looked into what that means, and students get lay out with their syllabus what I kind of expect them to know and to master at certain levels of the proficiency. In terms of teaching in a classroom with a camera, it took some getting used to. First of all, I tend to speak a lot louder. I notice on myself because I think I need to bridge that distance to the remote classrooms by raising my voice, which of course is not necessary. But anyway, you do kind of have to deal with the camera and the live students, and you cannot forget that you have to address both. And I noticed on myself in the beginning, I was more towards geared towards the camera because my fear was that they wouldn't get the right kind of experience, that I'm kind of neglected my live students. Also the way this room is situated, and that's why I was saying the spatial arrangement is really important. The way our room is, it's a little small, so I kind of talk over the heads of the present students. So if you are trying to set up a room like this, just experiment with the seating arrangements and speakers and camera arrangements so that that the technology interferes as little as possible in the teaching. So anything administratively is kind of challenging, or the dates for semester starts and beginnings or breaks. For example, now this week Duke is on break, so I can't really do new stuff when Duke is on break, or when one school is on break. I try, so I have to think about these issues when I lay out my syllabus to make it as fair as possible for all the students involved. That's kind of local support. There was in the setup of this class, you heard Dean Campbell, I think, speak earlier. That was very helpful. Also, I work together with our Center for Teaching, as well as our second language learning center, CESLIS here. In terms of what I would like for my own sort of improvement, I would like to have more training in being a second language teacher, and so I would like to have support for that. especially as it relates to the sort of the digital format, media format. I think that's all I had for you all now. I'm going to hand over now to, with a little bit of pride, one of my students.
Thank
Tara.
you. So I'm Tara, and I'm a second-year student in our master's program in Latin American Studies. And I'm really glad to be here with all of you today, since I have personally benefited a lot from this language consortium. I am Mareike's TA for K'iche, and I'm in the second semester at Vanderbilt through Duke of Haitian Creole. So overall, I've had a wonderful experience. I'm taking a language that otherwise I wouldn't have been able to. So I'm extremely grateful to everyone who has made that possible. I have seen improvement despite the hurdles of technology, and I think in my own speaking and reading, writing, and comprehension skills. And I've also had more opportunities to collaborate with other people, both on campus in some ways, but mostly off campus. For example, this past October, since I entered the Creole, I'll start by saying that I entered the Creole class at Duke in the third semester, since I had some experience with Creole previously. But the class that I entered into, they were in their third semester. So I was able to participate in the International Creole Day that took place at Duke in October. So that's something I never would have been able to do if this language consortium weren't happening. I was able to participate in a video that our Creole professor, Jacques Pierre, put together that I filmed myself, and then I filmed my part and then sent it, and it was put together all on Duke's side, but I still got to be a part of that. And also, which I think is really important, I've been able to benefit from the resources on Haitian Creole and Haiti that Duke has, that because it's not an emphasis of our center or our library resources, I wouldn't have had access to normally. We had a guest speaker in our course last semester who, otherwise probably wouldn't have had the occasion to visit Vanderbilt, so that was a really great opportunity. And I've been able to access the digital resources at Duke's University library because I also have access to their online classroom platform, Saikai, but also through their library I have access. I think I see two areas where there could be improvement, and unfortunately, or maybe not unfortunately, they're basically things that take place outside of the classroom or that the teachers inside the classroom have less control over. And one of those is technology, which we've talked about a lot. But so for the first semester through Duke, there were 6 students in the classroom, and I was the only student outside of the classroom. There were no students enrolled in UVA, so there was the professor and 6 students at Duke and myself, and I think we negotiated the problems of like group work, for example, when you're alone in a classroom and you're told to pair up and there's no one to pair up with. I think that worked out pretty well, actually, because it was easy to arrange people. For example, whoever I would work with would just sit closer to the camera, and then it felt much more personal than if I had to yell or like shout across a table to someone I was supposed to be paired up with. But semester 2 is a little bit easier because there's a grad student enrolled at Duke and myself, and I'm still the only person outside of the Duke classroom, but with fewer students enrolled. Overall, it feels more intimate, and like we actually haven't had many tech problems this semester, but it's we used class time really efficiently because of that. I will say that semester 1, there was a bit of time lost with technological problems, and a lot of those things weren't things that I could resolve or that the teacher or students on Duke's end could resolve. So I think that really speaks to the importance of having a person available, unfortunately, maybe throughout the whole class time, because as we have seen in our K'iche class, sometimes the technology is working fine in the beginning and class is going great, and then something happens and none of us are savvy enough to figure it out.
We had one, if I may interrupt, one day Vanderbilt was attacked by some kind of vicious, I don't know what that was, but we receive a call from Virginia that we have to answer. So we had these rogue call that sets up the class, right? But then somebody, probably a computer or whatever, hackers tried to call into Vanderbilt and probably tried to get in somehow. We had probably 200 calls come in during class time. And so if I hadn't had Tara there, decline. It was like, what's going on? And then so often technology people, I love them, but they sometimes don't know right at this minute what to do, or they have to be called, so there's a time delay, and in my lay terms, I often don't know how to describe the problem, that sort of translates very quickly into a solution. Anyway, that's...
And that actually happened a few times the first semester as well. Another thing that I think has been an improvement actually with fewer students in the classroom the second semester is the room design and positioning of students, which the first semester it was difficult to have all of the students and the professor and the whiteboard in one room. And of course it's up to the professor how often he or she wants to use the whiteboard. So it wasn't too much of a problem, but being able to see the students you're supposed to be communicating with, and we did a lot of group work, which is great and really helped our speaking skills and made it feel less like a distance learning class because we were able to participate together. It was just difficult to go back and forth between seeing students and seeing the professor. Again, not as much of a problem this semester because there are fewer of us. I think one thing that if you're looking forward to having students enrolled in distance learning classes, one thing to think about is having a basic orientation for them to technology, both to the system in the classroom where they will be and whatever platform that the other school uses online. So, for example, we use Blackboard here, which I'm basically familiar with, but I wasn't familiar with Duke system, Saikai, so that was a hurdle for me. Accessing assignments on that platform, submitting things, finding corrected assignments, that took some time to get used to. Let's see. And then on our end, of course, I'm not actually a very technologically savvy person, so it would have been helpful to have a bit of an orientation to that, and also how to work on and off a computer when you're sharing a PowerPoint, for example. So recently I was sharing a PowerPoint, but couldn't figure out how to share the audio for the PowerPoint. Which, it's not a big enough problem that I would call someone to, someone in our tech department to come and help with, but at the same time it took away from a part of the learning aspect that I wanted to incorporate. The other big piece that I think we should look forward to is enrollment. Being the only person in the Creole class, again, great experience, but it would be better with another person in the classroom, or even with another student at UVA, because both semesters I am the only person outside of the classroom. And of course that takes maybe more marketing, maybe convincing students of the importance of it. And I have personally spoken to people, and I think there's interest, but there's always a gap between interest and action. So convincing people to actually enroll in the classes is a challenge. It would also make group work easier, and as we've seen sometimes in our K'iche class, when there is a little bit of confusion, it's so easy for one student just to ask another person in the room for clarification really quickly without interrupting the class. And that's something that if I need clarification on something, I do have to interrupt the flow of the class in order to get that clarification. And a final point is that, as community was mentioned a few times, I think being the only person in that class made it even more important to find other people to work with outside of the classroom. And I've maintained really good contact with our professor through email and feedback on assignments. But it would, I think, really be beneficial to students to have a site on campus where they can either, if not have a mentor, have maybe a time to meet and discuss with other students enrolled in distance learning courses. For example, I happened to meet the facilitator for the Tibetan class recently, but that was just sort of coincidental. It might have been interesting to have met that person earlier and then been able to talk about our experiences and see if maybe they were having similar tech problems, or how they mediated that, or even just to get solutions to those problems just between us. Yeah, I think that might be it. But I'm also happy to answer questions if you have any.
Okay, so we have just a few minutes for questions for this panel. Do you have any questions? Okay.
Yeah, great panel, thank you. Just a couple of questions. One is, with the caveat that you will never stop learning, is it reasonable to expect like a student that goes through 2 years or 4 levels with a summer intensive or some kind of combination, that at the end of that period, that person would be reasonably fluent to be considered like at least creating a national capacity on languages? That's one question. And assuming that is true, like what can that person or what can you do with that knowledge? And I'm specifically thinking of, I think, a great need, and I don't know if you receive calls like asking for interpreters to go to the courts, like one of the, I think is a great need. If we're supposed to contribute to the values of the U.S., like freedom, equality, justice, like this tragedy that we're seeing of all these people that come here and they're caught in an awful situation that they just don't have the minimum of help with language. So, any comments on that?
I don't think it can be achieved. That language proficiency in that short amount of time, it's not an option. It's not going to happen. Plus, I think what's even more crucial, the kinds of tasks as you're describing require a specialized vocabulary and specialized pragmatics and so on and so forth, which would require a specialized course in which you actually teach them. I mean, they have that in larger, Spanish programs. You might have that, Spanish for the profession and so on. And Arizona State is having a conference about it and doing a great job.
But if I may add, I have received those calls, and I consider myself not native speaker fluency, but I can hold a conversation in K'iche. But I still feel that I'm underqualified to, as much as I'd like. I don't know if I provide actually a service. However, I have other colleagues of mine have done that. Some of them run in the problems of dialects. K'iche speakers come in, and the variety is so different that it's difficult. Yes, ideally, yes, it's hard to get there.
I refuse it even for German, and I'm a native speaker of German because it's legal consequences, and I don't want to be accountable for it.
And most states also have actual certification programs, and normally the just minimum to be certified is a superior level. So that would be problematic for most people.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult. Even in Peru, where they've now got some laws that the courts have to work in Quechua, the language of the legal system is so specific in some ways to European languages, the way it's been developed, that there aren't very good, even functional equivalents. And right now, Arizona has got a law that you have to have special legal training in the language. I don't think that would be available anywhere. So I was contacted with a group of people from Chiapas, a language I didn't really even know. They wanted to deport these people. Instead of deporting them, they wanted to prosecute them as coyotes, and which would put them in jail for a while. And so I talked to them. I quickly determined that Spanish was not a language they were really functional in, enough to really understand what was going on. And so I gave testimony that they needed somebody to find an interpreter in their language. They then threw out the case and deported them rather than prosecute them because they could not find anybody, especially to certify at that level. And I think that's what would happen if anything is challenged over an interpreter. The person who challenges it is likely to win because they're not going to be able to get anybody certified in an indigenous language as a legal level.
And this is, of course, just a hugely growing problem because of the percentage of migrants now that are indigenous language speakers. And your presentation just last week about the immigration into LA is now something like 60% speakers of indigenous languages. And so it's a huge, I mean, talk about career opportunities, right, if you were certified.
So there is your need. Now you can argue for the language.
It is.
Eric, could you just elaborate a little bit more on the facilitator role? As you said, you were working in that capacity for the Tibetan class, right?
Actually, it's another person who is a facilitator for the Tibetan class. I'm not sure how many people are enrolled, but I think there's one student enrolled. And then there's a facilitator who I think speaks Tibetan. And then for the so I have also been working as the facilitator for the first semester of Creole, or actually it might be the second semester, but we have one undergraduate student enrolled in first or second semester Creole class, and I've been facilitating for that. So attending class once a week, I helped her, mentored her with homework. She speaks Creole. She's Haitian, and she just really consulted me for help with writing. But
So
yeah.
you help out basically in a
Sort of like a mentor capacity, yeah.
But not in a technical capacity for facilitating.
Only in what I've learned from my own experience, yeah.
This is a question actually for Shock. So, she was commenting that the class has been small. Are you getting pressure from Duke to continue to push for recruitment in other schools, or is Duke? I'm curious about this relationship between the host institution, even though recruitment should be the responsibility of the receiving institution. Are there episodes in which the host institution puts pressure on the instructor to say, come on, we're doing this with UVA, we're doing this with Vanderbilt, we're supporting you in this, we have to see more students from the partner institution?
Not really. Because the way we started it there is with the help of Haiti Lab. So it's kind of structure, it's not just it's like Creole history, culture, and then we put everything together as long as I have several students who are new. So it's up to the institutions to find people. It would be better if we have those students who might see what we're there for at Duke, and that's what matters, like segmented students, and even 1 or 2.
And so you your attitude is it's up to them entirely, I'm not gonna sweat it. I mean, it's like, but.
Yeah, I would also say for us, when we joined the partnership this year, it was very important to us. I mean, I think it's in the best interest if you have a partnership that all of the partners are working as hard as they can to increase enrollments, right? And as y'all heard earlier, at Vanderbilt, it was really decided by the higher administration that we were gonna join this partnership. We were brought in as the Center for Latin American Studies and Mareike as the K'iche instructor after this decision had been made. And so it wasn't, you know, we want this language to happen. It was, we want this digital classroom and we want to be able to have this greater flexibility in teaching courses. And so once the ball got rolling, and it really did take a year, you know, as we've talked about, for all of this to happen, I got online and I found the contacts at the Centers for Latin American Studies, not so much at Duke because we were already in close contact with each other, but like at UVA, who we haven't worked with very much, and to make sure that the people I know who are running undergrad programs in Guatemala know that K'iche is now going to be offered at UVA. So I think that's the other thing that we can do, back to this theme of the NRCs working together, the NRCs and the non-NRCs working together, right? But using our contacts through our different disciplines and through our different world areas programs to make sure that our counterparts at the different institutions know that these languages are being offered to increase enrollments, which is better for the teachers and it's better for the students, as we're hearing, and also I think gives more reason to be for the partnership to continue. And I think it's, this is the first year, and so I think, we were late in getting the word out with the Haitian Creole. The Tibetan has also been low, and so, I hope that next year, we've certainly been trying to get the word out, that there will be more Vanderbilt students enrolled. So, yeah, just have to see. Yes?
At this point in the evening, I think I probably should just give a short comment as opposed to a question. I don't know, but I just wanted to say thank you everyone for your talk. It was really innovating, and I was just thinking about what you started off with, saying positioning yourself in Michigan, and that the interactionist approach was sort of how you characterized, I guess, the work, and that one of the challenges that came up then later in online education was the difficulty of interaction and sustaining interactions, and specifically the negotiation of meaning, I'm guessing, is one of the areas where this this approach really hangs all of its value. How do we get learners to use these technologies to negotiate meaning and in interaction and converting input into intake and so on and so forth with the frame that comes out. I just think that seems to be like a nice area to really focus our attention on and think about what sort of, through what modalities and what kind of task structures and so on that the students on two sides or three sides or multiple sides of these interactions are really able to engage in the substantive negotiation of meaning. And it's an open question for me. I don't know if it's a question for the group or not.
But I think Steve earlier came up with a lot of good points, which is that that's also the opportunity. That is the opportunity to teach that language explicitly, to make things explicit that maybe before aren't explicit but are so crucial for communication. And it's going to help them in all kinds of other communication because we have to be so more explicit with, it's like when I talk with my husband on the phone, he does a back channel, right? And so I tell him, I'm like, you got to say something, or I think you've dropped the phone, right? So we have to do this, and that helps us in our communication.
One extra comment. One thing I try to do with K'iche, take it out of the sort of exotic language corner. It is a functioning language just like any other language. It just happens to be spoken by a certain population in Guatemala. So having actually to use modern technology, and I pull stuff from second language websites, something. So slides that do not have any cultural Maya context sometimes, in order to create this kind of different interaction about and with, or engagement with, what we typically think of as a sort of exotic, or as we say in German, an orchid language. I think that brings it up to a different kind of, possibly at least to a different kind of level.
Now you get a reason to use it. Isn't that what we want?
Well, thanks to everyone. Thank you for being here. Thanks for all the comments. I think we've all learned a lot. So.